Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. My name's Jeremy Champa. Today we're going to look at some selected questions from the SAT Practice Test 6. So let's jump right in. Okay, folks, we're looking at number 4. This is a question about punctuation, right? So we start by analyzing the style of the question. And because I see that there's changes in this colon and commas and all that stuff, I know that this question is about punctuation. So let's review some rules about punctuation. I think we're all fairly clear on what a period does. We need a full sentence, obviously, before a period and after a period. Let's talk about a colon, because that's present in 2 answers. A colon requires a full sentence first. That's the most important rule. A colon can also be replaced by words like namely, or such as, or for example. I'll just leave namely up there. Sorry if my writing's bad, but that says namely. Okay, and then we have commas, which can do a bunch of stuff, but suffice to say, commas separate clauses. So it doesn't matter which one is independent, but of course you have to have a full sentence before you put another period, right? So I could get into depth with commas more, so feel free to ask me about that. But in the meantime, I'm just going to move on to analyzing which of these punctuation marks work. Oh, I guess we have a long dash too. So a single long dash, because I don't think there's another one in this sentence, a single long dash is exactly the same as a colon. Independent clause first. And that means like whatever you want after in each case. It could be full sentences or other stuff, but the important part is what comes first. So look, I can cross off C and A because they're exactly the same. There is no difference between putting a colon and a long dash after the word with. They're both wrong because it's not a full sentence to say, it was thick with, right? That's not a full sentence. So my little trick for telling you something is a full sentence is, hey, I've got to tell you something, and then trying out the phrase in question. So, hey, I've got to tell you something. It was thick with. No. So the word with messed it up. It was thick is a sentence, but it was thick with is not a sentence. We have 2 answer choices that have been removed, and now we have a simpler choice, which is colon or comma. Now, in this case, I think it's going to be the colon. Let's see. The point would be, do we have a full sentence before? Just weeks after the scientists added nitrates and phosphates. That's not a full sentence. Here's the comma. The water turned bright green. That is a full sentence. Notice I skipped this part when I read it because it's simpler to get rid of prepositional phrases. In is a preposition and the words that follow it up until the verb. The water turned bright green. It was thick with the same type of algal blooms that had plagued Lake Erie. It was thick with algal blooms. So look, those are both full sentences. We can't use a comma to separate 2 full sentences. The colon works because we have an independent clause, and then we end up having another independent clause after, which is fine. Okay, cool. So that's number 4. Let me know if you have any questions about that one, but I'm going to keep moving here to the next selected question. Let's see. I believe it would be this one. And I think we're looking at number 9. Let me just double check. Yeah, we're looking at number 9. Okay. Cool. So this is a question about conjunctions. That is to say, and maybe that's not the technical term for this, but I think about these words as connecting 2 sentences, right? So connecting 2 ideas, what came before and what came after. So I could be wrong about calling it a conjunction, but just like the word and or but, however is a lot like the word but, right? So that's how I think about these. Suffice to say, whatever you call them, the deal is to consider what comes before and after. And I have an important maybe adjustment for you to make. That is, don't read the original. Like, skip this for now. Skip that original. The research demonstrated a clear correlation between introducing phosphates and the growth of blue-green algae. So there's a correlation between putting phosphates in and then growing algae. Legislators in Canada passed laws banning phosphates in laundry detergents, which had been entering the water supply. I think that would be subsequently, like the next thing that happens. Subsequently is sort of like, think of the word sequence. Sequence is in that word, sequently. Subsequently meaning the next thing that happened. So look, the reason that makes sense is because, look, you can cross some stuff off. There's not a contrast between, it's not like but. You can't say there's a correlation between adding phosphates and the growth of blue-green algae. There's a correlation between these two things, but legislators passed a law. Like, no, that the legislators, it's like kind of separate. You could say it, therefore they passed a law, but not but. It's definitely not similarly, because these aren't the same things. And legislators passing a law is not an example, right? So even if you're not crazy about subsequently, the beauty of a multiple choice test is you get to cross off answers as you go. And if you can get rid of those other three answers, you'll be good, even if you don't know that subsequently is great. So to be clear, I'm not saying that you cross off answer choice A. I'm not saying that no change is never right. I'm saying that when you're trying to look at the relationship between these two sentences, you cross this off to begin with, or you don't read it. Maybe don't cross it off, but like read around it is my point. Don't let the original frame your thinking. There's like a thing that's happened in corporate America recently where people use the word and instead of but, even though they mean but, and that's to like change how people think about the relationship between two phrases. Maybe it's positive, right? An example of this would be like if a girl let a guy down easily by saying, I really like you a lot and I think you're great. And instead of saying, but I have a boyfriend, saying, I really like you a lot and I think you're great and I have a boyfriend. Right? So the idea being, if you link things with the word and, people feel like it's not as negative as if you link it with the word but. So to zoom into this question, that is to say, the word but tells us ahead of time that something negative is coming. The word and does not. So people are like manipulating language by using the word and to shade something as positive, even though it's technically negative. My point is, in a question like this, if you read the original, which was what, for example, if you read the original, you're going to be sort of in the mindset of looking for an example. And you might kind of think of it as an example, even if it's not a perfect example. Maybe not, but it's certainly possible for that to happen. And that's why it's good to read around the original so that you don't give the original some like extra weight among the four answer choices. Okay, so hope that was helpful. I'm going to move on here to the next one. Okay, so I think we're looking at 15 here, but I'm going to do both of them. So 14, because we have punctuation stuff, so let's talk about it. This is for semicolon is the same as a period. So full sentence, period, or semicolon, and then another full sentence. We've already talked about commas here, so let's keep going. The tower survived. This is a full sentence. And its tilt made it an Italian icon. That's a full sentence as well. Comma and linking to full sentences. I think bottom line is you can't put a comma if then you're going to say it attracts visitors from all over who flock to Pisa to see one of the greatest architectural weirdnesses in the world. Weirdnesses. Let's just cross that off now. It's not weirdnesses. Anyways, going back to number 14, we can't have this comma and then another full sentence. So that is a full sentence. If you're having trouble thinking about it, if it's a full sentence, ask yourself who or I'm sorry, not who or what. Ask yourself, hey, I've got to tell you something. It attracts visitors from all over the world who flock to Pisa to see one of the greatest architectural strange things in the world. That is a full sentence. You've told somebody something. And if you finish your, hey, I've got to tell you something with having felt like you've told someone something, then you've got a sentence. So we can't have a comma there. Okay, D is classic because look, it changes it attracts something, it attracts visitors is already a sentence as long as they don't mess it up later, and they don't. So if you change subject verb to just the gerund, which is when you take a verb and you add ing, technically that turns it into a noun. But don't worry about that. What you should worry about is This is the important parts of the full sentence are right here. It attracts visitors. If you change it to attracting visitors, you no longer have a full sentence. So this semicolon would have been perfect if they didn't change anything else, but because they did, it doesn't work. So what's the best answer? Well, make this change that makes it an incomplete sentence. Attracting, right? Eliminates the full sentence subject and verb. It attracts. But that's okay if we have a comma, because we don't need another full sentence. We already have sentences. Luckily, the tower survived is one. Its tilt has made it an Italian icon is another. Okay, so number 15 is, let's see. So there's not that much to say about these kind of questions, except to say that, like, your best bet is formal over informal. If you don't know which answer is just sounds the best. But it's probably not weirdnesses. And see, deviations means changes from the norm, so that's not totally perfect. Abnormal usually means something that's not, it has a negative connotation, right? So I don't really love this answer, oddities, but certainly it's true that oddities means like attractions. It means like things that are strange, but like sort of just in like a quirky way. I don't associate it with a positive connotation because I associate it with the old American, probably European too. There's these old things called freak shows. It's really like probably the least politically correct thing in the world right now, or in the modern world in general. But like, about 100 years ago, there were freak shows, like sort of traveling shows that would show oddities. So I don't really like that word as something that it sounds negative to me, but ultimately it's the best one in this case. I'll say this, there's a few weird questions in practice test 6 for the grammar that I don't think are representative of the whole thing. So that's one of them where, the style of question is reasonable, but my point is that, 9 times out of 10, the formal answers are better than the informal answers. That's probably the best thing I can tell you about those questions. Okay, so let's find the next one here. Okay, so let's see which ones we're looking at in this set here. We're looking at 21. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to just move. Look, I want to mention number 20 just to say that these are all wrong because they're all redundant, right? So the simplest answer is best. And then the same thing is true on number 19. Being is almost always wrong. Berland is would create a second full sentence. He is does exactly the same thing. So A and B are exactly the same functionally. In this case, there's no difference between saying Berland and he because we know who he is. Okay, so now 21. Advocated. Advocated to. Okay, so this is one that there's not that much to say about because it's about, in some ways, idiom. He advocated the action of using soil extraction. So look, it has to be advocated because we need the main verb to go with Berland. Berland is the subject. Subjects start full sentences. So just to be clear, you have a period right before Berland, then you have a colon after soil extraction. So this is a full sentence. We know it's an independent clause, right? We need an independent clause before the colon. If the first word is Berland, that's the subject. You could put like extra stuff, comma, subject. Or you could maybe put like one adjective in front of the subject or, a little bit of description in front of the subject. But the subject's really oftentimes near the beginning of the sentence. Just for example, by 2001, that's not the subject, but comma, almost 77 tons of soil. You could roughly say that whole thing's the comma. And 9 times out of 10, that's the way sentences work. I mean, like sentence 1 is a weird like counter example of this, but sentence 2, subject Berlin began, right? Twice daily, comma, here's the subject, Berlin evaluated, right? So usually those are the subjects. My point is, if Berlin is the subject, he needs a verb that goes with him. INGs are not main verbs, so you can cross off D. Advocated to use soil extraction is pretty close. Let's say this. If I'm choosing between A, B, and C, I'm getting rid of C because there's the using of is an awkward phrase that has extra language to it. The and of, where these other ones don't seem to have those extra language, and I don't think that extra language adds anything. So if I was in between maybe A and B to start, after I'd gotten rid of this ing and this extra language in C and D, I guess respectively, the extra language in C, the ing and D. So I'm down to 2 answers. Advocated to use soil extraction, advocated using soil extraction. So there's a subtle difference between those two. It's not that important, generally speaking, but the difference is if you say advocated to use soil extraction, it sounds like he's advocating for himself personally to be doing the soil extraction, is kind of how I read that. Whereas advocated using soil extraction is like advocated a method. That's the way I'm hearing it. I would say that the difference between those two is extremely subtle. But oftentimes when you use a main verb, they'll call INGs helping verbs. They're really called gerunds, but helping verbs. Those go together. That's when INGs work after a main verb in relation to that verb. That's one of the ways they work. Tricky question, but if you're in between A and B, that's cool. One of the rare cases in which INGs are right. Okay, so let's see where we're at here. Next question. I think it's going to be this. Okay, so let's see. I think we're looking at 25. 24 and 25 kind of have some common stuff going on. They're word choice in both cases, and there's no real hard and fast rules for word choice questions. But look, keep pace is more formal than maintain the tempo, get in line, or move along. The supply of physicians is not expected to keep pace. It's just the most formal answer and ends up being the right answer. Bolstering is the most formal answer here. Amping and revving kind of mean the same thing, and they're both relatively colloquial, informal. Arousing is not correct here. Bolstering is. So in both of those cases, the answer that's sort of the most formal has the highest likelihood of being correct. But the reason I'm going to move on is because there's not that much to say about word choice. This test has more word choice than almost any other one, so it's not common that you'll have that many of these questions. Okay, so let's look at this one. This is number 30. Just make sure I didn't miss anything that I had planned to talk about. 25, then 30. Okay, this is a good one. This is comparisons. Okay, the training period for PAs is markedly shorter than the training period for physicians. So we can't delete it. We need something. Those is wrong because we're trying to say singular training period is markedly shorter than the singular training period of physicians. So if it said the training periods, then you could say those, but that's not what's up. So we're down to 2 answers. Now, you don't need to say compared with if you're already using an ER. Shorter is a comparative term. Anything with an ER is comparing two things. So we don't need to say compared with. That's extra. That for physicians, remember we said those was wrong because it wasn't training periods, would be those. Training period, singular. That, singular. So there's the best answer. Comparison questions. Okay. Those ones are important, really important. They don't come up that much, but they seem to be a question that stumps people a lot of times. Okay. So, excuse me. Sorry for yawning. I'm not bored. Okay, so 32. According, or at this point, the writer is considering adding the following sentence. So should we add it or not? Don't worry about yes or no. Worry about the because. So it provides additional support for the main point of the paragraph. Physician's assistants will likely outnumber physicians by 2025. Let's see. I mean, PAs are important. Seems a critical component. That seems to be, or a critical complement. Sorry. That's the topic sentence here. We need to grow at much faster rates. Okay, well, I mean, like, let's just, because this is data, let me just see if this is true. 2025 predicted physician assistants. No, I mean, like, they're not going to outnumber physicians, right? There's 216,000 physicians, and there's 42,000 physician assistants. So in this case, because it's data, I can just go and verify that. So should you add it? No, because it's not true. It's not because it's irrelevant. It's because it's not accurate, right? And just a quick check-in with 33 while we're at it. To greet more patients, as in people, not as in like taking your time. So, and then than is comparison. Than ever before. So not then, because that's time. Tricky because we're saying ever before, which is of course time. But we're comparing, at that time compared to ever before, right? So because we're comparing, 2025 to earlier times, comparisons require the word than. Okay. Now we have 39. Let's pull that question up. This might be it. Yeah, that's it. Okay, here we go. So 39 and 40. Oh, yes. And so I'm going to do this. For 39, let me just zoom in. So we have punctuation rules. Now, remember, if I'm going to zoom back out to get a clearer image, if possible. Let's just redo this. I'll set it up so we can talk about both 39 and 40. Oops, wrong one. Sorry about that. 1 second. Pull up the right question here. Well, before I do, I'm going to reset my chalkboard. So that's part of the reason it was blurry, because the chalkboard was zoomed in. And let's find this material. So we have this stuff. And then we're going to add, I'm going to add some stuff because number 40 asks about the next paragraph. So I'm going to add some stuff so we can look at that with the other stuff. So here's the next paragraph right here. All right, so let's do this. Hopefully you can see that well enough. I could zoom in a little bit, so let's do that. Sorry that I'm sort of like managing blurriness versus smallness. Anyways, so number 39, if you have any troubles looking at this, like definitely follow along on your own page. But look, I see a long dash and I see a colon. It's hard to see it, but that's a colon right there. The question is there any other long dashes? Aha, there is. So look, if there weren't, if it was just one long dash, then the colon and long dash would be the same. But we do have another long dash. So I wonder if these are working together. If they're working together, then what we would have is like parentheses. Like the question is this like a set of parentheses? It kind of looks like it. In addition to supervillains, the new, soon-to-be iconic characters of the age had to cope with mundane real-life problems. Okay, Cool. So when you read around the parentheses, if it makes sense, then yeah, that's exactly what's going on. So I actually can just pick D and feel confident. So look, here's the reasons why a couple of the other ones are wrong. I can cross off A and B because the requirements for a colon and a semicolon, while different, they both require the same thing to begin with, which is an independent clause. And then afterwards, you can have whatever for a colon. Sorry for not spelling whatever right, but you know what I mean, whatever. And then independent clause is required after semicolon. But they're both going to get crossed off in this case because you don't have a full sentence before, like ending with the word age. You don't have a full sentence. In addition to supervillains, obviously that's not a full sentence. And there's only one comma, so either the sentence is on one side of the comma or the other, right? If you have two commas in the middle of a sentence, then maybe those commas are working like parentheses, and you read around it, which is why commas are kind of complicated. But I mean, I don't think that's the case with these two commas. In addition to supervillains, soon to be iconic characters of the age, certainly that's not a full sentence. None of those things are full sentences, so you can cross those off. And the problem with C is what happens to this long dash. Look, the verb for the sentence is had to cope. The new soon-to-be iconic characters of the age had to cope. If you put a long dash first, you don't have a full sentence, even though you have a lot of language. Hey, I've got to tell you something. Let me try it out. Hey, I've got to tell you something. In addition to supervillains, the new soon-to-be iconic characters of the age. No, not a full sentence. Doesn't matter if you add the names Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, blah, blah, blah. So there's a way that we just were able to cross off all the other answers from a very technical standpoint, as well as seeing the way the two long dashes work together to verify that D was correct. Okay, so now I'm going to scroll down a little bit so we can see number 40 a little bit better. Okay, so look, questions that give you prompts, you want to pay really close attention to the specific language that they mention in the prompts. The only way for this question to be objective, so that there's one right answer and three that are definitely wrong, is for them to use specific language in the question and have that specific language map on to what we see in the correct answer and not map on to the things we see in the incorrect answer. So we want a conclusion to the sentence in the paragraph that logically completes the discussion, and provides an effective transition. Logically completes the discussion of the Silver Age. Effective transition into the next paragraph. Well, let's see which ones don't feel like the end of the completion. I guess, what are we talking about in this paragraph? Let me scroll back up here if I can. The Silver Age was marked, I'm reading the topic sentence of the previous paragraph. By contrast, the Silver Age of comics was marked by characters, right up here, marked by characters that, though somewhat simplistic by today's standards, were provided, were more realistic, right, than their golden age. So we're talking about simplistic but more realistic. They have to pay the rent and deal with family squabbles. Their interior lives were richer. So more complex characters, more realistic characters in some ways, even though we're talking about the Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man. Still, we're saying that they're more like real people than just Superman. Okay, so check it out. This paragraph is saying that the Silver Age guys are more complicated, Silver Age heroes. Although sales remain strong for Golden Age stuff. Okay, so look, think about this sentence. Although, that's a really important word. Although sales remained high or strong for stalwarts, Superman, and lesser extent Batman. Look, I can get rid of A because these characters, if it seems like they're referring to Batman and Superman, and we're saying although they remained strong, this is not a contrast. If they have an enduring appeal, that means they stay strong. These characters cannot refer all the way back to Spider-Man and so on, Fantastic Four and the Hulk. Can't do that because these characters, these is a pronoun, and there's characters mentioned in between. So there's a lack of the word although suggests there's going to be a contrast between the two ideas, and the idea that the sales remain strong and that they have enduring appeal is not a contrast. So I got rid of one of them. All right, and now going back to what I was originally looking for, which is a logical completion. So I should have paid attention at the beginning to the fact, the logical conclusion of the sentence. That allowed me to get rid of A. Now we're talking about the paragraph, ending the paragraph. Although sales remain strong for these dudes, the old dudes, the distinction between the later stages are less. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense to say, although the sales remain strong for the really old guys, there's less of a definition between other groups. Like, that's not really, the word although stops meaning, it doesn't make sense in that situation. So keyword is although. That's a word that connects sentences. Look, this one makes sense. And so does D. Both of these make sense. C more than D. Although sales remained strong for the old guys, readers increasingly gravitated towards the new guys. As the Silver Age drew to a close, that really does logically complete the paragraph. Now, the reason that D doesn't work is because this next paragraph would have to describe the changes to Batman and Superman in order for D to make sense. If you say, although sales remained high for these Golden Age guys like Superman and Batman, these characters underwent significant changes themselves. First of all, it doesn't make as much sense with the word although, but holding off on that, you would have to say, well, tell me in the next paragraph then, if we're going to have an effective transition to the next paragraph, tell me what happened to those characters. And we don't see that. We have a talk about the transitions from different ages of comics instead of the specific transitions that Superman and Batman went under. So C is the best answer. So notice I used different components of the answer choices, different components of the original question, the idea of logically completing the sentence, logically completing the paragraph, and transitioning to the next paragraph as ways to eliminate answer choices. Okay? That was 40. Let's move on. I think there's like two more that we're going to look at today. 43 and 44. Let's see. Okay, here we go. 2 for 1, both questions, 43, 44. All right, really important point about however and nevertheless. This is a really interesting question. To start with, nevertheless is a specific subset of however. Think about however. Analogy I like to use sometimes is here's the state I live in. It's not, I guess, is it exactly a box? It's pretty much a box, Colorado. Maybe the angles aren't quite 90 degrees, or maybe they are. Shows how much geography I know. But look, I live in Boulder County, which is here-ish or something. Maybe here-ish. Think of nevertheless as Boulder County for a second. And think of however as the state. So that is to say, whenever, if you could use, if someone says, I live in Boulder County, it's for sure that they live in Colorado. I guess maybe there's another Boulder County. But if you said, I live in the city of Boulder, if the fact that I live in the city of Boulder, I'm sorry I'm struggling with this, but I want to be clear. The fact that I live in the city of Boulder implies that I live in the state of Colorado. The fact that nevertheless would work as an answer choice implies that however would also work as an answer choice. Now, that's something that can't happen on a standardized test. It can't be that two answers work, but they're yeah, but we like just nevertheless better in this situation. No, can't happen. So you can't be oh, well, you're wrong to say you live in Boulder because you also live in Colorado. It's of course that's a ridiculous statement, right? So, just to invert that, someone who lives in Colorado does not necessarily live in Boulder. A situation in which the word however works is not a situation in which the word nevertheless necessarily works. Nevertheless is a more specific subset of however. So we all, have some sense of what these words mean. Nevertheless is a little bit like even though, or pushing through some sort of adversity and continuing on or something like that. But bottom line is we don't even have to think about that. We can cross it off because answer choice B is present. It might be, however, and maybe that this person lives in Colorado in my metaphor, but it's definitely not that only one answer is right, and it's, nevertheless, that can't be possible. Okay, now look, yet is a fanboys. So if we're using yet, it's because it's in the middle of the sentence here. It's because we're connecting two complete sentences. For both commercially and arguably creative reasons, that's not a full sentence. Cross that off. Now we have a simpler choice. Is there a contrast? And look, it's important to say that sometimes when they use the word however in the middle of the sentence like this, if you use yet in the middle of the sentence, it's got a function. It connects what comes before and after. However doesn't do that with two full sentences. Only fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet. So we don't have any of those, right? So however is not in that set, I should say. So the way that however will work here is that even though it's present in the middle of the sentence, it would be connecting the previous. Essentially, you could put it at the beginning, middle, or end. Let me see if I can show you an example of this. Here we go. Look at these three. So the SAT is difficult. However, maybe I'll put a comma there. However, you can beat it if you study. And maybe it's like that too, if you want. Doesn't need to be. The SAT is difficult. You can beat it, comma, however, if you study. The SAT is difficult. You can beat it if you study, however. All three of those are the same. So my point is, if we're thinking about the word however here, the question is, does that contrast hold from, essentially the stuff that comes before where I'm drawing a line and the stuff that comes after? So let's see. Before it says, such efforts have yielded diminishing returns, as even the complete relaunch of DC Comics superheroes line in 2011 has failed to arrest the steep 2-decade decline of comic book sales. People are not buying comic books, and nothing changes that, is what they're saying. However, for both commercial and arguably creative reasons, no transition was more successful. No, however doesn't make sense there, because if you say that nowadays these companies are having problems, that goes in line with the idea that the earlier times were the more successful times. Right? You can't say nowadays they're struggling to sell comics. However, however, the most successful period was before. Let me say that again, hopefully a little bit more smoothly. They're struggling to sell comic books nowadays. However, the most successful period was before. No, doesn't make sense. The word, however, those two things are not in contrast. So look, the right answer ends up being this one that most people think is kind of weird, then. But it's like the word therefore, and you could put it both at the beginning, middle, or end of the sentence. So I'll do it at the beginning so that you can see, again, the contrast between, or sort of the relationship, not the contrast, but the cause and effect, therefore or then, between previous sentence and current sentence. So, such efforts have yielded diminishing returns, and the relaunch in 2011 has failed to arrest the 2-decade decline of comic book sales. Therefore, for commercial and creative reasons, there was no transition that was more successful than the earlier one. That makes sense. So a lot of people are uncomfortable with the word then, but I crossed off all the other ones for very, very technical reasons that you can master. And if 3 out of 4 of them are wrong, then there's only one answer left. Right? Now, number 44, I think, is the last one we're going to look at. Let me make sure. 44, yeah. Okay, so this, that, or those, these, that, or delete. This is a comparison. No transition was more successful than the transition from the gold to the silver. Singular, no transition, was more successful than the translation. Those is plural, these is plural. That is necessary, because we need to say that transition. Right? You can't say no transition and then compare it to from gold to silver. We need to say no transition was more successful than the transition from the gold into the silver. The transition could be replaced by the demonstrative pronoun that. The transition is singular. Words like those and these are plural, so they don't work. Okay, hopefully that was helpful. Please remember that, review any of these that don't make sense. Notate as you're doing this work and stay organized. You want to learn from each and every one of these questions. The grammar section is one of these sections where you can 100% master this, right? There's a couple of questions that are like a little bit goofy. We saw with word choice, where maybe you're 50-50. So maybe we set our sights on, in 44 questions, we're sure that we can get like 41 or 42 of them right. And the other ones we can be 50-50 on, right? We can get rid of some bad answers that we know are bad based on what we know about the test, right? In many of those situations, like word choice questions, you could be like, the informal ones are usually wrong. We had that one weird question about, what was it? It was about like advocating the use of. Advocated using, right? Okay, 50-50. That's fine. But if we can get all the rest of them, then we're in a really good position, because if we can get, 42 out of 44, you're looking at getting probably almost all the points, maybe 20 points off, maybe 10 points off, sometimes still a perfect score, depending on the scale. So hopefully that's helpful. Master this section by staying really organized and referring back to questions. So every time you get a question wrong, write down what style of question it is. Punctuation, I'm calling a question like 43 conjunctions. Maybe that's not technically right. Right? I'm calling a question like 44 comparisons. All right. So thanks. Hope that's helpful. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.